equine, and so on. The second year coming into how we take care of these animals specifically, the different nutrient values that these animals need, and looking at the last 2 years as tracks for vet tech certification. SAE will be a big part of all of this, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But this ideal track is so that any student can come in at any time. So if a student wants to take a little bit of natural resources, a little bit of animal science, a little bit of ag mechanics throughout their time in the program, they can always take that introduction to animal science, and they'll be able to get a little bit of everything that they can use then to broaden their horizons within agriculture in general. Like I said before, SAE is a huge part of any agricultural program, and it's going to be required for all of my students. I want to do once a month check-ins with my students using class time to do this. SAE will be graded at that time. So the ideal situation is that my students will come to me with different goals that they have for their SAE, checkups on their SAE, what they've been doing and what they've been working towards, and I can help guide them down a path. Because SAE ultimately is student run, teacher advised, and I want to make sure that I'm a huge part of that situation. Another part of this is I went to the SAE for All workshop at the NAAE convention, and I learned that their foundational SAE has different tasks that students can do within that. Looking at career goals, looking at resume building, interview skills, and with that I just want to make sure that my students are able to engage in those activities. So during that once a month period, I'll have one of those tasks from the fundamental tracks being implemented in my classroom for that day. FFA is a huge part of our three-circle model. It's one that a lot of teachers focus on mostly, I feel. And I want to use that first year agriculture or animal science class to be able to introduce my freshmen to FFA. I want to do FFA Fridays. So this might mean we're doing leadership activities on one day. We might be learning about FFA in general one day on those Fridays. Just different aspects that bring in that leadership into my classroom. This could also include helping students coach the rest of CDE teams or LDE teams at this time. I also want to use my upperclassmen and my officer team to help engage younger members. So in Connecticut, every ag program has the opportunity to go to their 8th graders that they recruit from and be able to share what their ag program's about to recruit students. And a big part of that is that I'm not the one doing that talking. I remember as an 8th grader listening to students that were already in FFA and in that ag program talking to me about the ag program that made me want to do it. So making sure that upperclassmen are really helping to engage those students to keep my program in line and keeping students coming through. And a big thing that I really want to try to implement as national convention and state convention, not just for upperclassmen, but for other students within my program. I think that I know as a student in FFA, I didn't go to national convention until my junior year when I won a CDE, but it's very common for only seniors to go. But I think it's very important for underclassmen to also have the opportunity if they can. And that I want to do this by bringing maybe 1 or 2 sophomores, 1 or 2 freshmen a year with me, just so that they can see that experience from a different side and see that it's more than just our chapter at our local level, that the FFA is a huge organization that they can learn a lot from. None of this is possible though without community involvement. So I think that community involvement can be done in 3 different ways. One, we have to find those people in our community. So while I'm at Conrad Weiser, I'm going to be working with Select Sires, which does artificial insemination. I'm also going to be working with the conservation districts, Pennsylvania conservation districts, and the Pennsylvania Extension for Berks County, and finding those people in our community that we can then engage into our program. And this engagement can come in several ways. For example, Select Sires, I have them coming in and helping do artificial insemination in class. We're going to bring in reproductive tracks, and my students are going to be able to do that. This can also look through having them help coach CDE teams if they're really strong in that content knowledge, or even just being a guest speaker for the day. These are really important opportunities for our students to be able to engage with people within the industry so that they can make those network connections for when they graduate from my program and eventually move on to other avenues. The third part of this is grant applications. So in FFA and within an ag program, we have a lot of sponsorship needs, and I think it's important for myself to be filling out grant applications throughout different organizations to show to people in the community that I'm doing my part and also trying to find funds for my program, that it would be a nice idea for them to help sponsor this as well. So if I'm putting in some effort, maybe they can help me as well, and I want to really show that through using grants. To make this all run smoothly though, I have a few classroom expectations, procedures, and consequences. And I made some classroom management posters down here. So I'm not going to read these word for word, but I do want to talk about my classroom expectations. And my classroom expectation is basically that students will be here, be engaged. They're not going to be afraid to take risks in my classroom. I want students to really feel that that this is a safe spot and they can try new things, especially working with a lab. So I know at Conrad Weiser I'm going to be doing a lot with students investigating different routes within science, and I don't want a student to be afraid to present a science research project that they want to do because they're afraid to take that risk. I also want students to make sure that they're sharing their experiences with one another, but also seeing the other perspective of things. So their answer might not be this answer that the lab partners next to them got, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily the wrong answer and the wrong idea. So I want to make sure that they can see that side to it as well. Looking at classroom procedures, I have a few of them. I want students to be engaging in my class at all times, making sure that they are present and here with me in class and with each other from the bell work at the beginning of my classroom to the assessment of learning at the end of it, and just making sure that they're here on time and that they want to be here. Classroom consequences is something that I definitely struggle with because I really want to see the why of why something's going wrong in my classroom, and I have a really hard time finding that balance between being the friendly teacher and being the one that needs to sometimes put down the hammer. So most of my classroom consequences have to deal with getting to know my students and getting to know the why of what's going on in their lives. So that includes warning, talking to me one-on-one. This might be an after-school conversation, an after-class conversation. But if it's an ultimate safety rule that's going to endanger myself, another student, that student particularly, then we're going to look at more serious consequences, such as detention, call home, and a referral down to the office. In tying all my classes together, like I said before, I mainly want to teach animal science, but that doesn't mean that I can't engage with other teachers in the building and other teachers within the program. So I made a showmanship box. So that's right here. It's kind of like a big toolbox. It's ideally made so that students can put brushes into it and different things required for shows through like 4-H or other local county projects. And for this, I want to be able to use this within any of my animal science classes. So I know while I'm at Conrad Weiser, I'm going to be doing a small section on equine science, and I'm having my students plan through a horse show of how from start to finish you plan that, so they understand that what they're engaging in when they go there. And this project can be simply implemented into that, looking at a livestock show. So students will be ultimately looking at different prizes that students can get with different ways to fundraise for those shows, and a show box is something that every student kind of wants and everyone has for their animals already, so it'd be a good prize. So having my students in animal science design that for their needs, and then helping present that then to a woodshop teacher, a woodshop class, and having them help with the sketch designs and having them help with actually creating it, both classes together, making this box, would be a really cool opportunity to engage the classes together. And looking at this, you're using skills such as using a drill, using a table saw, drill press, using measurements for the wood, and making sure that you're drawing your blueprints correctly before you're doing it. So I think this project overall would be a great way to combine different classes within my agricultural program. Throughout my time at Penn State, I've taken 3 classes that I'm going to highlight that not only gave me content knowledge, but gave me ideas of who I want to be as a teacher. I'm going to start with applied arboriculture. This class is known as the tree climbing class. It's looking at how do we safely remove limbs for landscape needs. And basically every day in class, I was climbing to new heights and then limb walking out and learning about just forestry in general. And this was with Dr. Jim Savage. And the cool thing about this class is that Jim had a really good relationship with every one of his students. He wanted to know us and he wanted us to succeed. So going into this class, I was terrified of heights. I wouldn't come 5 feet off the ground. By the end of the class, I was about 80 feet up in one of the trees on campus. And it was because of that engagement with him that I was able to do so. He would yell things up to me and give me different tips, and it wasn't as scary going up because of the relationship I had with him, even though he was on the ground and I was 80 feet up, and which ultimately instilled confidence and gave me a new interest to go into. I had never looked at the forestry industry before, and now I look at it in a different way. The second class I'm going to talk about is education psychology. I took this at Penn State Berks with Dr. Shocker. This class gave me my first try of research as an undergraduate student. I did research with English language learning students, and I was able to see how we can write research papers and pull in other resources to help create those. It also gave me the baseline that I needed for my methods class this past semester in AE 311, which was youth organizations and agriculture education. And she gave me the base theorists that we ended up looking more into this past semester. She also demonstrated how to have empathy. So when I was taking this course, I had a lot going on in my life. My father was just diagnosed with a tumor on his spinal cord, and it was a lot to handle both my classes at Penn State and everything going on at home. But she was very empathetic towards me and showed me that that is a huge part of being a teacher from my second year of college, looking at that. She really helped me with assignments and was very reasonable with deadlines being extended, was really reasonable with me being home and missing class at some points and times. So really showing that empathy part of an educator was important to me that I learned in this class. The last class I'm going to talk about is Practical Parliamentary Procedure with Dr. Foster. I got to experience this class as not only a student, but as a teaching assistant as well. As a student, I was able to do a service project, and I taught to 2 classes of freshmen at my high school, Southington High. And during that time, I got to engage students in something that I'm really passionate about. A lot of freshmen have never heard of parliamentary procedure, and when you say that it's the effective way to run meetings, you kind of get, oh, what are we doing today? But I was able to create a lesson plan that was engaging to all the students in the room, and they ultimately were very curious about the topic and ended up having a conduct chapters and meetings team as well as a parliamentary procedure team after my presentation to them. And then as a teaching assistant, I got to teach with Mr. Nate Moyer as well, at co-teaching that class. So I got the experience to not only co-teach a class, but I also got the experience to see things I was learning in methods class and then apply it into that classroom. And it was a direct turnaround of knowledge and being able to use the skills I was learning hands-on in a very safe place that was not my student teaching internship site. Because I took that class, I did get my parliamentarian accreditation. I'm accredited parliamentarian through the Society for Agricultural Education Parliamentarians. And because of this, I was able to go work with the Pennsylvania Conservation Districts, again with Mr. Nate Moyer, where we were able to co-teach a class for a bunch of people throughout the conservation districts, their business management team, their general members. And the cool thing about this experience was there was different skill knowledge of parliamentary procedure. Some people had never heard of it before, and then some people were really knowledgeable in it. So being able to bring our class down to make sure that everyone was able to understand what we were talking about, everyone was in that proximal zone of development that we were talking about in methods class was really an interesting experience to me. I also then became members of different parliamentary institutions that I hope to be able to network with other parliamentarians to help coach CDE teams in the future, specifically looking this spring to coach a team at Conrad Weiser. Throughout my time here at Penn State, I also did a lot of professional development. So the past 2 weeks ago, I was in California at the National Association of Agriculture Educators meeting, and I was able to go to different teacher workshops and be part of the FAST Symposium for future agri-science teachers. I took a lot away from that, specifically looking at one of my favorite workshops, which was on inclusion with Dr. Vincent from the University of Kentucky. And since that, him and I have still been in contact, and he's actually been able to give me the demographics of Conrad Weiser Area School District, so I can learn more about my students before I even enter that school district in January. I also was able to attend the Pennsylvania Association of Agriculture Educators Conference this summer, and I was able to engage with other teachers across Pennsylvania as I stepped into the profession this coming year. I went to a bunch of workshops there as well, looking at the Chapter 339 workshop, which was very useful to me, especially as having pre-exposure to it before I started talking about it in AE 413, sorry. I also am involved with the Connecticut Association of Ag Educators and the New England Ag Teachers Association, attending their state conferences this summer. And I also sit on the the state alumni for Connecticut, so I'm the state alumni secretary for Connecticut, and I was able to attend their regional professional development this summer, actually held in my state. And at that, I learned how we can utilize alumni chapters in our programs. This is something I know my chapter doesn't have an alumni chapter, so I didn't get to see as a high school student, but I see the value in it. And after attending that professional development, I know that my future program should definitely have an alumni chapter and how I can better engage that. Penn State did a really great job of inquiry-based instruction with us. My whole cohort got to go to the Ag I Squared, which was looking at inquiry-based instruction within agricultural education. And I learned a lot more about what inquiry-based instruction is and how I could implement it in my classroom. So I was very thankful for that experience. And the last one I'm going to talk about is Domestic Study Away to Montana, or DSA to Montana. This experience, I was able to connect with other people in the agricultural industry throughout the state of Montana, looking at the hops farms, looking at different tribal sites, looking at different universities in Montana, but also being able to engage with schools. So this picture here is actually me teaching a middle school class in Montana. I was able to teach about leadership to them. I went to several different school districts and attended some chapter banquets while we were there. It was really interesting to see the differences between how we do ag education on our side of the country versus to that side of the country. Throughout my years, I've also had several jobs that have helped me throughout my time. So I'm going to talk about lake compounds being the first one. So I grew up on the same street as an amusement park, which is really funny to think about how I'm now in agriculture after growing up on the same street as a large amusement park. But through this park, I became CPR and first aid certified, instructor lifeguard certified, and water quality and insurance certified. My main job while I was at this park was to train all of the lifeguards. So I had 180 lifeguards underneath me, and I was running all of their classes all day, all before the season started. Those classes are 40 hours each and required a lot of rigorous training for my guards. So learning how to make sure that my classes for my lifeguard trainings were diversified to hit every learner in that room and be able to make accommodations when necessary was a really important skill I had to do. After that, throughout the whole summer, my job was then to host once a week in-services for all my lifeguards. So I would host 5 classes, 5 days a week to keep up on training and skills. I also worked with our third-party auditor and performed audits on my guards, and then was able to do little teach-backs with them after their audit to be able to improve our scores, as well as handle all the in-park audits of my lifeguards. Hillside Equestrian Meadows was a big part of my life. Like I said before, I grew up working on a horse farm. We didn't just have horses though, we had some alpaca, some sheep, chickens, a bunch of different things in small scales. And this is where I discovered my passion for agriculture. I started here at 9 years old as a volunteer and then worked my way up through barn manager and a riding instructor into my early teens. I was able to engage others in agriculture through this experience. We hosted Girl Scout troops, we hosted birthday parties that were educational, we hosted riding lessons, as well as doing just tours of our farm in general. So I live in a huge city of a population of 65,000 people, so a lot of times this is the first time people realize that farming is how you got like milk and how you got eggs. So being able to make those connections to the public was a really interesting task for me. And like I said, this is the time I got to try teaching. I was a riding instructor for several years to students. I had mainly students that were ages 4 through about 11 or 12, and then I was able to engage adult learners as well as they came through the farm and were learning about agriculture. I was very active with Connecticut FFA after my time in state office. So I worked as a facilitator on the state and national level. At National Convention a few years ago, I taught about 1,000 students over 3 workshop periods on leadership and how our strengths are used in a team setting. I also was a CDE judge on the state, local, and national level for several CDEs, including AgriScience Fair. And then I was a state convention assistant. So I hosted a 72-hour boot camp for our state officers that planned our state convention. And then I helped run the behind the scenes of state convention for several years at our state FFA convention. And the last one I'm going to talk about today is Girl Scouts of America. So Girl Scouts of America, I was their program specialist. I wrote curriculum for water safety, and I also tied environmental science into that. And part of my job also was teaching swim lessons at this point. I worked with K through about 9th grade in the pool, doing different activities with them to connect back to environmental science. But I also worked then 9th through 12th grade, getting those girls ready for being a counselor, so a lot more leadership training that kind of is similar to FFA. Tying this all together, through all these experiences, I've learned a lot about being inclusive and working with a diverse population. Like I mentioned before, I'm working with a professor at University of Kentucky trying to be more inclusive during my time at Conrad Weiser, and I hope that through that experience I can learn how to be more inclusive then when I step into my own classroom. Conrad Weiser Area High School is where I will be student teaching. This is a 2-teacher program with Mr. Adam Surfoss and John Seifert. They have 140 students in their agricultural education program in FFA, and then they focus on agri-science and investigation, and I'm going to talk more about that as we go through. They also have a middle school chapter, so their middle school chapter is 300 students, advised by Ms. Tabitha Meredith. They do 5th through 8th grade agriculture there, and their main events are Mock CDE Day and the Farm Show. So I'll actually be attending Farm Show with the middle schoolers through my time at Conrad Weiser, and I'm also going to be working a few days with the middle school students, looking specifically at 5th and 6th grade. On campus at Conrad Weiser, they have a dry and wet lab, which I'm excited to work in because I don't have much lab experience. So being able to work with students in those labs will help me learn more about science in general, but also how to manage that space. They also have a small kennel, a barn, and then a greenhouse. And in our barn right now, we do have a horse that they got so that I can help students with horse judging. A cool experience I've already got to work with at Conrad Weiser is the Science Research Institute, or SRI. SRI is basically 6 weeks that students come in the summer, and they engage in different science avenues. So they have students, they have professors there that do astronomy, that do agriculture, physics, you name it, they have it. And they bring in guest presenters in to help students go down whatever area of science they want. This is offered for the whole entire district, and it's 6th through 12th grade. Students get to work with different projects. So this summer I went out and I was able to work with students who were looking at artificial insemination. It was a great way to meet students as well as see what the program's really about. Looking at their program, they do a really good job of making sure their program is designed for their students. So like I said, that whole SRI experience is something that they also bring into their classroom, making sure that they are teaching what their students want. They also have certified agricultural teachers as well as biology teachers working in their program, because they do a lot of science research within that. And then they organize their records really good, looking at records for their FFA chapter, their budget, their LOC, everything's just, LAC, sorry, everything's just where it needs to be, and you can find that anytime, going back from before Mr. Surfoss worked at the program. Something that I'm going to try to improve while I'm at Weiser, I'm going to be working with ICEV to get students certified with the AQHA, American Quarter Horse Association Horse Judging Certificate. So I'm going to be working, I got a few free passes from ICEV after connecting with them at National FFA Convention and NAAE, and I will be making sure that some students get their horse judging certification. This will include barn management and horse safety as well. What am I actually teaching? So I am teaching 3 periods, 2 classes of Introduction to Agriculture, looking at FFA, safety, plant science, agronomy, integrated pest management, microbiology, and public speaking. And then I'm going to be teaching 1 period of current topics in agriculture, looking at animal domestication, breeds of animals, animal systems, plant science, and microbiology. In your package you have what I'm teaching day by day, and this is kind of the 15-week calendar that I'm looking at. I'm really excited to do this animal systems because I'm going to be doing dissection of a fetal pig, which I remember loving in high school, so I'm excited to do it with my students. I'm also really excited for microbiology and the plant sciences, because those are weaker areas of mine that I know Mr. Surfoss is really strong in. So being able to balance that off of each other was nice. He is also not as strong in animal science, and that is my strong suit. So we're going to make a nice team being able to compare those 2 classes. Some strengths that I have as an educator: I'm very empathetic. I think this is something that I know my cohort would probably also agree with. I know that throughout the semester I've been really, as we work together, I've been trying to relate to them and help them, and I think I'm one person in the cohort that tries to lift everybody up. I know that I'm very curious, so I mean this as I want to learn as much as I physically can. This is why I picked Conrad Weiser, because there are topics in agriculture that I'm not that strong in, and I recognize that, and I want to learn more about them. I also am very curious in pedagogical knowledge, so I want to learn how to be a better teacher by actively reflecting upon myself, and I think that's something I've done really well over the past semester as I do my labs. Like I said before, my strong suit is animal science. I took 4 years of animal science in high school, starting with animal production, going into vet science, looking at equine science. So animal science is where my niche is, and I can't wait to be able to share that with Conrad Weiser. And then FFA integration. I came from a very strong FFA chapter, one of the stronger ones in my state, and I think I can do a really good job of implementing that in my classroom, basing off what my experiences were, and then have been a state officer and being active in FFA over the past several years. My goals at Conrad Weiser is to become more confident. So I know that myself, I'm afraid of what I don't know. So I think I really need to get into that classroom and see how it is as an actual teacher to be able to gain confidence in my teaching abilities. I also want to gain more content knowledge. Like I said several times before, I'm going to a program that I'm not the strongest content-wise, so I'm excited to gain content knowledge. I also want to network. So while I was at SRI, I was able to network with the middle school teachers and some of the high school teachers in the building, but I want to branch out to other things that are not just science and see how I can make connections with other topics. I also forgot to mention earlier, I will be working with the elementary school in the school district trying to implement an agriculture curriculum. So working with those elementary school teachers, hopefully I can build my network. I also want to see how to implement that 3-circle model a little bit better. Like I said, FFA is something I'm really strong at, but how can I bring SAE into my program and keeping students involved in that? And then how to balance a home and work life. As a cohort in general, I think this is something that we've been trying to figure out all year long. And I'm really excited to see how different teachers in the building piece this together to keep their life going and their work life going, but how they can bring part of their life into their work life in general, and what that means to some people. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming to my final presentation. I really appreciate it, and at this time I will be taking any questions.
So here we have Ms. Morey monitoring the internet traffic, so if there's any questions, she will chime in there, but we'll start with a question from the audience.
Yes.
So you actually have on your list of things that you're teaching what is the difference between PA agriculture and Connecticut agriculture? And just talking to you and knowing you, I know that CT Ag Ed and PA Ag Ed are very different. How has that shaped you through your journey? Are you pulling things in from how Ag Ed is taught in Connecticut, how Ag Ed is taught in PA? What's your take on all of that?
So that's a really good question. So I definitely am learning more about how the different states do agriculture education. And to be honest, I'm learning more about how Pennsylvania does, because I think that Pennsylvania does a really good job of recruiting for FFA and keeping students involved. They do a very good job of SAE and just their whole model in general. So these are things that I'm hoping to be able to bring back to Connecticut, where I know we're not as strong in that. Specifically looking at how do we keep teachers involved with professional development. I know CAA doesn't do that great of a job of it, but PAA does. So those are the kind of the aspects that I'm hoping to actually bring home instead of bringing things from Connecticut to Pennsylvania.
Amanda, how will you assist students who say, I can't?
So how will I assess students that I say that they can't is going to be a really big challenge, because I know that that's something that I kind of struggled with throughout my high school and college career. But I think that the biggest thing is coming up with alternate assignments. So I know when I was making my assessments for Conrad Weiser, I kept in mind that I wasn't making just exams, and I was evaluating in different ways. So if my students know that from the get-go that I'm not going to evaluate everybody the same exact way by saying that I'm not going to do a test for everything, then that will alleviate some of that stress. And that's not saying that when I give a project, I'm going to have a rubric with it so that it's all the same type, like the same way I'm assessing, but knowing that I'm going to assess in different ways is a huge part of that. And also a big part of that is just making sure that my students and I have a good relationship. Because if they have a good relationship with me and I say this is something you can do and these are the reasons why you can do it, then they are going to be more likely to believe me and then believe themselves.
Let's go a little bit more specific. You were really excited about teaching about fetal pig dissection. What grade level are we teaching that to?
That is going to be to my 11th and 12th graders.
Okay, so I have a junior young man who says, nope, not cutting into a baby pig. How are you going to handle that?
So I'm going to handle that because they're going to be in groups during this. So I remember being in high school, there was someone in my group who didn't want to cut into that pig. So making sure that they're in groups with someone who is comfortable doing that, because you don't need to physically be cutting into that pig to learn the skills or learn what I'm trying to do out of that. You could still see the system of the different systems within the animal by just looking at it visually instead of looking at it in an image. And I think that's what I'm trying to do there.
Thank you.
We have a question for you from Zoom. This comes from Caitlin Rogers. And she wants to know, what are you most looking forward to once you get into the classroom working one-on-one with students?
So what I'm looking most likely to when I get into the classroom working one-on-one in students is something that I've been kind of drilling in this whole presentation, getting to know them one-on-one. I think that having that relationship with a student where I can help them, not just in my classroom, but with things outside of my classroom is really important, and the reason why I got into education to begin with. So being able to help that student make those stepping stones into getting into a career and getting through high school or through something in their life is something I'm really looking forward to.
And can you talk a little bit more about, you explained how in Connecticut most of the teachers are hired as a content teacher of a specific area in agriculture. Talk to me about the differences or the challenges that might present when you're developing that comprehensive three-circle model that we talk so much about having high-quality SEs.
Yeah.
Of education. What are the differences or the challenges between that and a traditional program in agriculture?
Yeah, so a big problem with that I can see is that when some teachers go into the program, they only want to look at like CDEs, for example, or SAEs that have to do with, for example, in my case would be animal science. And I think that that becomes like a barrier when I have a student that I might get along with really well and might connect with really well that is kind of doing that little bit of everything in the program that comes to me and says, I want to do environmental science CDE. And that's something that I'm just going to have to kind of get over and say, okay, you want to do environmental science. Although I teach animal science, I'm more than happy to coach you on that because the skill sets are the same. It's the content that's a little bit different. But when when we're doing things like that, we're still training the same leadership skills, the same public speaking skills. I could see the same thing with an SAE program. So if a student, again, if I'm coaching, if all the teachers divide X amount of students just randomly, then I might get a student in my SAE group that is not an animal science track, but I can still help that student.
Thank you.
Your turn.
I don't know, I was waiting. Okay, so we talked a lot about program planning and evaluation in AEE 413. Sounds like you talked about a little bit in 412 as well, but you caught yourself.
Yes.
Anyhow, point is, why do we evaluate agricultural education programs? What are the purposes of evaluation?
So there's two main purposes that I see in program evaluation. One is make sure that this program is actively reaching the standards that they need to meet for the state, for the national standards, and that's one way that as an ag program we can get funding. But the reason why I want to do evaluations is because it's ultimately seeing if I'm meeting my goals, and it makes me want to change things that I'm doing. It makes me look at something that I've done and see if I can tweak it, even though that the state might say, nope, you're doing this great, but it kind of makes me look at it a little bit deeper and evaluate, am I doing this the best to my ability?
Nicole, please articulate the power.
Did you just
Amanda.
He's been ill. Can you give him a bio?
Please articulate the power of why of inquiry.
So why is really important in inquiry-based instruction, because you do have students that don't necessarily like inquiry. They want to know the concrete reason. They want to know one thing.
Let me rephrase
I'm sorry.
that question because I am under cold mess. I want you to tell me why inquiry-based instruction is effective.
Okay. So inquiry-based instruction is really effective because it's not me, the teacher, giving answers. It's students investigating and figuring out things for themselves. And it also is not just one answer. It's not one size fits all on this. So students can ultimately get different answers across my classroom, and they can all be correct. It also helps with that critical thinking of why they are correct and why that answer fits to the problem we're solving.
Thank you.
Yes, John.
Amanda, agriculture is a very diverse subject. What are some of your go-to resources to help you develop in content areas that you may not be so comfortable in?
Okay, so I want to refer back to my planning for teaching at Conrad Weiser. I went a lot to the Facebook Ag Ed discussion group and looked at different answers and resources that teacher posted there. I also looked at NAE Community of Practice a lot and was pulling things and looking at different questions that teachers had asked on there. I also pulled some textbooks out from 115 and looked through the tables and contents to see how things were laid out and be able to pull content from there as well. And those are the three big things that I think I can use as an educator for content that I don't know for right away answers. If I'm looking more, if I have some time, there's different professional development offered across the country, online and in person. And Penn State, I know, does a really good job of giving those opportunities to teachers within Pennsylvania.
Amanda, as a follow-up to that, you're in a very unique placement. You have a lot of really intense science education.
Yes.
Tell me how you're going to work through when there's probably inevitably going to be many times that you don't know the content as well as you probably need to teach it. Talk me through how you're going to get to there.
So this is something that Mr. Sturfoss and I have talked about actually a lot, because I was very upfront with him that I don't have that strong science background. And what we came up with is he has a lot of resources himself from over the years, books, handouts, stuff of that nature that I can look at within days before the class. He also has a large science background, so does Mr. Seifert that works at the program. So being able to work with them on the lab, he said this is something we can do after school one day. If we can run through stuff before I have to go teach it, so I can know. But the biggest piece of advice I was given by my ag teachers, kind of being that one day ahead of your students. So if I can know enough content and I can know enough deep into that one day and maybe that day and a half, then I can keep myself going throughout the semester.
Amanda, how have you grown or developed with your digital fluency over the past semester?
So I think that this is something that I've been working on throughout my Penn State career, but this semester I've been more active with not only pushing out content via Twitter and via Facebook, but posting out different questions and getting responses back from other educators and other people within the cohort. I know that I've also been posting with blogs and looking at reviews, but not only are those reviews specific to me, but also, again, posting out those questions that can help other people. And maybe those are questions that others have been asking themselves that didn't want to ask, and then getting feedback from them, and then sharing that feedback, again, via social media.
Any questions from the audience?
So I know that Parley Pro is something you and I are very passionate about. But
Yes.
There was a time in my life where I started Parley Pro in freshman year, and I got so overwhelmed with the content. There was just so much being thrown at me. I sat down, threw Robert's Rules out the door, and cried. I was like, I'm not doing this. Now here I am, an accredited parliamentarian. How do you, so I hit a brick wall with Parley Pro. If you have a student like that, how do you get them over that brick wall, get them to understand why it's important, why they should, get them enthusiastic about Parley Pro?
So I think that this applies to all subjects, is once a student hits that brick wall and is very frustrated with something, you need to take that step back and you need to really make sure that you're like, okay, this is not something that we have to pursue at the second in time, but this is something that we can do together and overcome together. And looking at specifically Parley Pro, where it does become very frustrating at times, having students break it apart. So we don't need to learn. So one, I would start with just the basics of parliamentary procedure in general, like bylaws and types of meetings. I wouldn't jump right into motions when I'm teaching that content, but making sure that when I am doing it, I'm chunking it. And even when that student does get frustrated, is okay, let's look at this little bit right now, and then we can come back to the whole big picture later on, is really important to me, because I never want them to get frustrated where they don't want to learn something all together, but seeing making sure that they have small achievements throughout, basically, is where I'm getting with that. And that they can see, okay, this is how I do it, and this is how it's done correctly. That's a win for them, and then they could take that win to the next win, and next win, and next win.
Mandy, you mentioned several times a focus on inclusion and inclusive behaviors. I'd like for you to identify one specific strategy you plan on implementing in the spring to reach those goals.
Yes. So when I was at NEE, like I mentioned before, I had a really good conversation with Dr. Vincent from University of Kentucky, and his advice to anyone entering a new school, a new classroom, was to start by just going to students' activities on campus, and that can be a play, that can be a sports team, because if I get to know their family, I can get to know more about them. So making sure that when I do go to those things, I'm very purposeful about who I sit with, and it's not just the teacher that I co-teach with in the back of the room, it's being integrated with the family as well to learn more about that student. And that's the one I hope to bring to me with Counter Advisor.
No more questions from the panel or from the students? Could you help me in congratulating the